He saw the steel move before he heard anything. That's the part that never makes the official reports. The way the superstructure, hundreds of tons of cold-rolled carbon steel, seemed to ripple like a flag caught in a slow, impossible wind. One driver, heading southbound on the Sunshine Skyway Bridge at 7:33 in the morning, later told investigators that the bridge didn't fall. Not at first. It danced. The red aviation warning lights mounted at the top of the structure, the ones designed to keep low-flying aircraft away, peeled away from their positions and dropped silently out of his field of vision. Then the roadway itself began to roll, like a wave pushing through the concrete, he wrote in his NTSB testimony. It seemed to wave and roll as it was falling. He was already reversing his car, desperately slapping the side of his door, screaming out the window at oncoming headlights that were still cutting through the fog behind him. 3 cars passed him, then a bus. They didn't stop. I want you to hold on to that image. A Greyhound bus, carrying students from Tuskegee University, driving through fog so thick the driver couldn't see the void that had just opened up where the road used to be. Because what happened on Tampa Bay that morning in May 1980 wasn't simply a bridge collapse. It was a catastrophic convergence of 7 separate system failures, a weather phenomenon that defied every forecast model available, and one man standing alone on the bridge of a 609-foot freighter, watching his radar screen go completely blank in real time. This is the anatomy of the Sunshine Skyway disaster. And by the end of this, I promise you, you will never look at a bridge the same way again. Let me give you the geography first, because it matters. Tampa Bay in Florida is a problem. It's always been a problem. The bay effectively cuts the city of St. Petersburg off from the rest of the Florida peninsula. You're surrounded on 3 sides by water, and the only practical way across is a narrow corridor at the bay's southern end. For the first half of the 20th century, residents either drove an enormous inland detour or boarded a ferry. A bridge was proposed as far back as 1926, but the Great Depression killed the funding, and World War II killed everything else. It wouldn't be until 1954 that the Sunshine Skyway finally opened, a steel cantilever structure stretching 4.14 miles across the lower end of the bay, resting on rows of concrete piers drilled into the floor of the ocean. At the time of its opening, it was the longest bridge on Earth. It was also, from an engineering standpoint, a particular kind of gamble. The Skyway was built narrow, 2 lanes, perched on concrete columns that rose straight up from the seafloor with no impact protection around the base. The designers knew ships would be passing beneath the bridge constantly. The shipping channel running under the main span is one of the busiest on the Gulf Coast. Bulk carriers, tankers, container ships, all of them threading through a gap of open water between those columns every single day. To address this, construction crews install wooden fender systems around the bases of the support piers, physical buffers designed to absorb glancing blows from errant vessels. It was, technically, a reasonable solution for 1954. But here's what the engineers didn't account for: wood rots. By 1980, those fender systems had completely deteriorated. Not partially, not mostly, completely. The NTSB report confirmed it. The wooden protection around the support piers had rotted away and had never been replaced. What stood between the weight of a 186-meter cargo ship and a concrete bridge pillar was effectively nothing. No barrier, no buffer, no second line of defense, just open water and bare concrete. Now, between 1969 and 1980, 7 different vessels had already struck those supports. 7. And the bridge had survived every single one of them, which is the most dangerous kind of failure, because it convinced everyone involved that the system was more resilient than it actually was. Similar to the pattern we analyzed in our piece on the Byford dolphin decompression incident, where a series of near misses created exactly the kind of institutional complacency that turns a manageable risk into an irreversible catastrophe. Systems don't fail because people are reckless. Systems fail because survival becomes indistinguishable from safety. The Sunshine Skyway had survived 7 collisions. It would not survive the 8th. May 9, 1980, 6:30 in the morning. The MV Summit Venture is sitting at anchor in Tampa Bay, a 609-foot boat carrier loaded with phosphate, waiting for its harbor pilot. The ship's captain, Ngwin Van Bin, has been cleared for departure. The weather briefing log that morning described conditions as less than ideal, patchy rain, some fog, reduced but manageable visibility. Critically, no severe weather warning has been issued. The bay is open. The channel is clear. John Laro steps aboard. Laro is 34 years old, and he is good at his job. Harbor piloting is one of the most demanding specializations in maritime navigation. You spend your career learning the specific currents, depths, blind spots, and behavioral quirks of a single body of water. And when a ship needs to thread through a tight, complex approach, they call you. Laro had made this run dozens of times. He knew the Skyway. He knew the channel. He'd checked in with another vessel near the bridge earlier that morning to get a ground-level weather read. And the report had been acceptable. He started guiding the Summit Venture toward the open center span of the bridge. And then, at approximately 7:20 a.m., something happened that no forecast had predicted and no ship in the bay had reported. A squall, a sudden violent microburst of wind and rain, descended on the northern approach to the Sunshine Skyway with no warning and no precedent in the morning's meteorological data. This wasn't a gradual thickening of fog. This was a wall. Visibility dropped from a half mile to essentially zero in under 2 minutes. The rain was so heavy, so dense, that it physically overwhelmed the Summit Venture's radar. The return signal became indistinguishable from the storm's own noise. Laro's radar screen, his primary navigation instrument, went dark with static. He was navigating a 186-meter ship through a zero-visibility corridor toward a bridge span with no electronic assistance and no reference points. He ordered lookouts to the bow. He ordered the crew to stand by the anchor chain. He reduced speed. He did everything the protocol required. But here's what the investigation would later confirm, and what every maritime safety instructor has been teaching since 1980. At the moment Laro's radar went dark, the Summit Venture was already off course. Not dramatically, not recklessly, by a matter of degrees. The kind of drift that under normal visibility conditions a pilot corrects without even thinking about it. But in zero visibility, with no radar return and no visual reference, that drift became invisible. The ship was tracking toward one of the concrete support piers rather than the open span, and Laro had no way of knowing it. The bridge appeared from the fog at a distance of approximately one ship length. One ship length. At the speed and mass of the Summit Venture, that's not a warning. That's an announcement. Laro ordered full reverse and drop anchor simultaneously. The anchors hit the bottom. The engine screamed into reverse. The bow wave rolled back along the hull. And the Summit Venture's port bow struck column 2S of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge at 7:33 a.m. with a force that the NTSB would later describe as equivalent to a direct structural detonation. Now I need you to understand what happens to a bridge in the seconds after an impact like that, because this is where the physics get genuinely terrifying. A cantilever bridge transfers load through tension and compression across interconnected spans. When you remove a support pier, instantaneously, violently, you don't just create a gap, you invert the load distribution across the entire affected section. Every span that was previously in compression now has nothing pushing back. The load that was distributed across multiple points suddenly has nowhere to go. Engineers call this cascading structural failure. In layman's terms, the bridge doesn't fall so much as it folds, and it folds fast. A 1,297-foot section of the southbound roadway, steel, concrete, asphalt, rebar, everything, fell into Tampa Bay in approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds. That is less time than it takes you to read this sentence out loud. But the part that nobody talks about, the part that was documented in witness testimony and buried in the NTSB appendix, is the sound before the collapse. In the fraction of a second between impact and failure, drivers on the bridge reported hearing something that didn't belong. Not a crash, not a boom, a low, resonant hum, a harmonic frequency that traveled through the roadway surface and up to the tires of their cars. One witness described it as feeling like the road was breathing underneath them. The steel was vibrating at a frequency beyond what it was designed to contain, and for just a moment, the entire structure expressed what was about to happen. It sang its own failure before it fell. And that is why this bridge danced. On the ship below, John Laro was already on the radio. All emergency equipment out to the Skyway Bridge. Vessel has just hit the Skyway Bridge. The Skyway Bridge is down. Get all emergency equipment out to the Skyway Bridge. The Skyway Bridge is down. This is Mayday. Emergency situation. Stop the traffic on the Skyway Bridge. Stop the traffic. Simple instruction. Impossible execution. There was no automated barrier system on the Sunshine Skyway in 1980. No sensors, no remotely controlled gates, no direct line from the Coast Guard to a bridge-mounted warning system. The only way to stop traffic on the bridge was to get a human being physically in front of that traffic, and by the time Laro's Mayday transmission was even being processed, the fog on the bridge was so thick that a car traveling at highway speed had no visual warning that the road ended 150 feet above open water. The man who reversed his vehicle, the one who started screaming out his window, saved his own life through instinct and 3 seconds of horrified observation. He could not save the cars that passed him. He could not save the bus. The Greyhound descended into the water, carrying 26 people. 25 of them died on impact or drowned in the wreckage below. 6 cars and 1 truck followed. In total, 35 human beings fell into Tampa Bay that morning. 34 of them did not come back up. The one who did was named Wesley McIntyre. He was 56 years old. His pickup truck was caught in initial structural collapse, meaning he didn't drive off the broken edge. The road simply disappeared beneath him, and he fell with it, impacting the hull of the Summit Venture on the way down before hitting the water. By every measurable physical parameter, Wesley McIntyre should not have survived. The NTSB noted that the impact forces on the vehicles were equivalent to hitting a concrete surface at terminal velocity. But McIntyre forced his way out of the submerged cab, fought his way to the surface, and was pulled out of the bay by the crew of the very ship that had destroyed the bridge. He spent the rest of his life trying to make sense of that. And now I want to talk about John Laro, because this is a part of the story that gets misunderstood. The part that people flatten into a simple narrative of negligence when reality is significantly more uncomfortable. The Coast Guard inquiry criticized Laro's decision to proceed in adverse conditions. That criticism is legitimate and fair, but the inquiry also acknowledged explicitly that the squall had not been forecast, that other vessels in the area had reported manageable conditions right up until the moment of impact, and that Laro had taken every precautionary action available to him once the situation deteriorated. He was not cleared reluctantly. He was cleared because the evidence supported it. Here is the more difficult truth. The system failed before Laro ever stepped aboard the Summit Venture. The wooden fenders protecting the bridge supports had been rotting for years. Management knew, engineers knew, and the budget to replace them hadn't materialized. The bridge had no automated traffic warning system. The approach radar coverage for harbor pilots navigating that specific corridor had gaps that had never been formally addressed. 7 previous collisions had produced no structural overhaul of the bridge's protective infrastructure. Not one. This is a pattern we've examined before, in the Nutty Putty Cave incident, in the Byford Dolphin, and every catastrophic failure this channel has documented. The disaster doesn't begin at the moment of impact. It begins years earlier, in the accumulated decisions to defer maintenance, ignore near misses, and trust the resilience of a system that was already compromised. By the time a human being is standing at the point of no return, the choices that actually determine the outcome were made by people who had already left the room. Laro returned to work as a harbor pilot after the investigation closed. He was soon diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and could no longer operate. He went on to train nautical science students at the State University of New York's Maritime College, using that morning as his primary case study. He told students repeatedly, "If you misjudge, you've got hell to pay." He later worked as a counselor for prisoners and crime victims. I don't know what to do with that fact. I'm not sure I'm supposed to. The replacement Sunshine Skyway Bridge opened in 1987, 7 years after the collapse. The new structure is a cable-stayed design, longer, taller, and built around a different engineering philosophy. Massive concrete fenders now surround every support pier. They are not wooden. They are not temporary. They are engineered to absorb a direct collision from a fully loaded freighter without transferring meaningful force to the structure above. The day before the new bridge's official opening, a shrimp boat struck one of those fenders head-on at speed. The boat sank. The bridge was untouched. An automated weather warning system was installed, capable of closing the bridge entirely to traffic when conditions deteriorate below safe thresholds. The kind of system that, on the morning of May 9, 1980, would have stopped the Greyhound before it ever reached the approach ramp. In 2014, a granite memorial with a bronze plaque was installed at a rest area overlooking the accident site in the middle of Tampa Bay. It bears the names of the 35 people who fell. Most mornings, the Tampa Bay fog rolls in off the water and obscures it completely. I think about that a lot. The corrections that followed this disaster are textbook examples of reactive infrastructure engineering, and they work. The new Skyway's fender system has functioned exactly as designed. The warning system has closed the bridge dozens of times since its installation without incident. Lives have been saved by the direct application of lessons extracted from 35 deaths. But here is what I need you to carry with you after this video ends. Those fenders, that warning system, those design changes, all of it was technically possible in 1980. The engineering knowledge existed. The manufacturing capacity existed. The budget that paid for the new bridge existed in some form before the collapse. What didn't exist was the institutional pressure to act before the catastrophe rather than after it. 7 ships had already hit those unprotected pillars. 7. And every time the bridge stood, it was treated as evidence that the system was fine. It wasn't evidence of safety. It was evidence of luck. And luck is not an engineering standard. It's just a failure that hasn't happened yet. That is the definition of a point of no return. Not the moment the ship strikes a column, but the moment you decide the near miss doesn't count. The Sunshine Skyway Bridge danced on the morning of May 9, 1980, because a 609-foot ship struck an unprotected column in zero visibility fog, and the roadway above it resonated at its own resonant frequency before cascading into Tampa Bay. That is the physics. But the real reason it danced? Because for 11 years, everyone involved in maintaining, protecting, and regulating that structure heard the music getting louder and decided it was still safe to keep driving. 35 people drove into silence. One of them drove back out.